I don't remember exactly when the desert began whispering to me at first. It was the wind. That dry, bone-shaving hiss that slides through the cracked sandstone and sifts down dunes like ghostly fingers raking through a graveyard. Everyone hears it in the desert. Everyone writes it off. But that wasn't the whisper. I was 29 when I joined a survey expedition in the Sonoran Desert. Our job was to map geothermal activity and conduct environmental studies for a pipeline project no one in the team really supported. The money was decent, though, and we were promised a short trip, just 2 weeks with a crew of 6, including myself. That I had a background in geology and had been doing desert fieldwork for 6 years. I wasn't new to the heat or the long silences of vast, sunburnt land. That I had seen mirages, hallucinated heat shimmers, and heard things in the dead of night. But I had never heard this. Our base camp was set up 50 miles off any main road. No cell serviced no towns for hours. That we had satellite communications and a beat-up solar generator to keep our instruments running. The first few days passed uneventfully. Mornings of gathering samples, afternoons of documenting and running tests. Nothing unusual. Until nightfall. That's when I heard the first whisper. We were camped near a cluster of rock formations known to locals as Las Lenguas, the tongues. From a distance, they did resemble thick tongues of stone rising from the desert floor, slicked smooth by centuries of wind. It was said the Yavapai avoided the area, claiming the rock spoke when the moon was fat. I had forgotten that until I woke up to what I thought was someone murmuring outside my tent. I blinked into the dark. The air was still. No wind at all. The stars were stabbing bright overhead, and I could hear the slow breathing of my teammates in their tents. I waited, my heart beginning to thud in my throat. There it was again. Not speech, exactly, more like syllables rubbing together. Not made by a voice, but something trying to sound like a voice. A scrape, a click, a slow exhale forming something just shy of words. I unzipped my tent and stepped out into the sand. The night was cool and still. The tongues loomed nearby, bathed in silver light from the moon, and no one was up. I did a slow circle. The sound had stopped. Back in my tent, I didn't sleep. In the morning, I asked if anyone had been up during the night. Tom, our hydrologist, groaned and said he'd pissed behind a bush at some point, but that was it. Nothing out of the ordinary. But for the rest of the day, the desert felt off. You know how animals react right before an earthquake? That skittish alertness? That's what it was like. The birds were quiet. The jackrabbits that usually darted around our station were gone. Even the wind seemed to hold its breath. I thought I was just spooking myself. The power of suggestion. I didn't mention the whisper again. But that night, it returned. This time, it said my name. Not clearly. Not even properly. But it was there, drawn out in a wet, clicking moan. Jay, son? I sat bolt upright in my sleeping bag. It wasn't close. It wasn't far. It came from the direction of the rock formations. I didn't go out this time. In the morning, I looked pale enough that Claire, our biologist, asked if I was sick. I made up some excuse about altitude and dehydration. But I wasn't dehydrated. I'd been drinking nearly 2 gallons a day. I was meticulous. I'd been in enough desert situations to know better. Later that day, when we were testing groundwater saturation near one of the drier pits, we found something odd. A straight line of stones, 12 in total, leading away from the site. Each stone was the same size, all evenly spaced, heading directly toward Las Lenguas. I bent down and examined them. No animal would do this. No wind or erosion could arrange these. The others brushed it off. Weird, Tom said, and snapped a photo. Claire joked it was some kind of ancient desert tic-tac-toe. But I saw something under one of the rocks, half buried in the sand. I picked it up. A strip of cloth. Faded plaid. Old, maybe decades old. I didn't recognize the pattern. Didn't match any of our team's clothes. But I didn't say anything. That night, I dreamed of teeth. Enormous, yellowed, brittle teeth, clacking open from a split in the desert floor. A mouth. Not a cave. Rows and rows of ancient enamel. Something dragging itself forward from the abyss beyond. Not crawling. Not walking. Just sliding. When I woke up, my tent was filled with sand. I swear I had zipped it shut. The next morning, I found drag marks outside my tent. Not like something crawling. These were wide and straight, like a body being pulled. They circled the tents once, then vanished into a dune that I told the others. They looked as no one had heard or seen anything. They laughed nervously, made jokes about scorpions on parade. But I could tell they were disturbed. Claire kept glancing at the rocks. Tom didn't drink his coffee. Even Felix, the team lead, stopped writing in his logbook halfway through. That afternoon, the wind came back. A hot, buzzing wind that carried grit and whispers, and no one said a word. That night, I woke up screaming that it wasn't a dream, that I heard it again, my name. But this time closer. Right outside the tent, that it sounded wet. Like the voice was being made by something without a throat. Something forcing air through pulpy tissue to speak. That I shone my flashlight out the flap. Nothing. But I saw a trail. Not footprints. Not drag marks this time. Impressions, like a series of ribs pressed into the sand in a line. The pattern curved around the base of Las Lenguas and vanished into a narrow crack in the stone. That I didn't sleep the rest of the night. That first light. I went to the crack. That I shouldn't have. That I know that now. That it was about 4 feet wide. Deep. That I couldn't see the bottom. That I dropped a rock. That no sound. Then I noticed the walls. Inside the crack. The stone had been worn smooth. Not by erosion. Not by time. It looked scraped, smoothed down by something going in and out. Repeatedly. The stone smelled like something dead. That I turned to go and found Claire behind me. She looked pale. She held something in her hand. "Did you drop this?" she asked. It was a small silver pendant. I didn't recognize it. "No," I said. She frowned and looked around. "I found it at the foot of my tent. This morning. Just there." I took it from her. It was etched with something. An old symbol. Looked almost like a spiral made of teeth. That day, our solar generator died. No more equipment, no more instruments. Felix radioed the company, told them we were cutting the trip short. We packed. That night would be our last. We kept a fire going. Stayed in one tent. No one said it, but we were scared. You could feel it. The way we avoided looking at the rocks. The way we flinched every time the wind shifted. Around midnight, the whispering began. We all heard it. And it wasn't saying just my name anymore. It was listing them. All our names. Slowly, wrongly, mispronounced but unmistakable. Jason, Claire, Felix, Tom. Raina. Max. The wind wasn't strong, but it was steady. The whispers circled the tent. Max, who was usually the quietest, stood up and unzipped the flap. "Max, don't," Claire hissed. He stepped out. Flashlight raised. A moment later, the light clattered to the sand. We ran out. Max was gone. No trace, no footprints, no scream. Just vanished. The sand where he stood was smooth. We didn't sleep. We held flashlights and knives and sat with our backs to each other until dawn. As the sun rose, the whispering stopped, and at the edge of camp, lined up perfectly, were 12 more stones. We didn't speak for hours after we found the stones. The sun had barely crested the horizon. Shadows stretched long across the dunes, and a haze of heat was already beginning to shimmer above the sand. The 12 stones were aligned in a perfect arc, each no larger than a fist, each casting a long finger of shadow toward the crack in the rock formation. Max was gone. His flashlight lay in the same place we'd found it hours ago, the lens shattered and half buried in sand. The spot where he had stood was smooth, eerily so, as if the earth had consciously erased his presence. No drag marks, no disturbance in the soil. Just absence. Felix was the first to move. He stomped over to the stones, then kicked one with such force it sailed several feet and bounced down a slope. His breath came in ragged gasps, and he looked like he was trying not to cry. We all were. Max had been with the team for over 3 years. He was a steady hand. Always quiet, always practical. Nothing ever rattled him. Until the desert whispered his name. We packed in silence. There was no vote and no discussion. Just motion. Bags zipped. Tents collapsed. Cases sealed. It took under an hour. We abandoned most of the equipment. Only grabbed the essentials. Water, radios, solar flares. Felix tried the satellite unit again. Still dead. The wind hadn't just knocked out our generator. It had fried something deeper. I kept looking back at the crack in the rock. The place I now thought of as the mouth that it stood open, silent in the sunlight that I could see the scrape marks again, dull and pale against the smooth sandstone. My thoughts spiraled. What was in there? Where did it lead? What had taken Max? We started walking 50 miles back to the nearest road. 5 of us now. The desert heat was already climbing into the triple digits, and we had limited shade. We planned to reach the halfway point by dusk and camp under a formation called El Cuerno, a lone horn-shaped ridge that could give us cover. The wind followed us. Even as we marched in silence, heads down and packs heavy, I could hear it, the soft hiss, the syllables riding each gust like seeds on the air. Sometimes they sounded like words. Sometimes they sounded like wet skin peeling off dry bone. I tried to ignore it. Claire wasn't doing well. She kept looking over her shoulder. Once, she stopped walking entirely and just stood there, staring behind us, her eyes squinting against the glare. I saw something, she said. We turned. There was nothing. Just dunes and dust devils and the smear of heat warping the horizon. What did you see? I asked. She didn't answer, just shook her head and kept walking. We reached El Cuerno before nightfall. The horn-shaped rock loomed like a warning finger stabbing at the sky. The area around it was flat, wind-blown, almost too clean. Like something swept it regularly. We pitched a single tent and fire. Too dangerous. Felix set up a basic perimeter with glow sticks and chemical lights, and no one spoke about MX, and no one dared speak his name. The whispers came again that night. This time, they weren't just outside. I woke up choking. The tent was filled with sand. Not piles. Just enough. Enough to coat the floor. Enough to fill my ears. My nose. I spat grit and clawed my way to the flap. My flashlight flicked on and lit up a storm of dust swirling just outside. Even though the wind was still, Claire sat bolt upright, gasping. They were in the tent? She whispered. They were in here. Felix grabbed the light and scanned the walls. No rips, no openings. Then we saw the indentations. 4 of them. In the center of the tent floor. Shallow impressions, about the size of dinner plates. Not footprints, more like suction marks. Like the pads of something round and slick. We didn't sleep again. By morning. Raina was gone. No screamed, no struggle, just vanished. Her sleeping bag was laid out perfectly. Her pack was zipped. Her boots were gone. But her glasses, thick, black-rimmed, were folded neatly on top of her pillow. Claire began sobbing. Felix cursed and kicked over the light canister. That left 4. And the line of stones had grown. 16 this time. Arcing away from camp, leading into the desert, leading back toward the mouth. We started walking faster. The second day was a blur of sweat and pain. We rationed water. Our skin blistered. The heat pressed against us like a living hand, but we didn't stop. Not until the sun dipped low and we could no longer see the ground without light. We camped on a rocky shelf. No tent this time. Just sleeping bags. We kept watch in pairs. I was with Tom. Around midnight, he nudged me. Hard. What? He pointed toward the ridge behind us. Something was moving. We saw it only for a second. A ripple in the darkness. A shadow that didn't belong to anything. It slithered across the rocks, too fast to track, then gone. What the hell was that? He whispered. I didn't answer. Instead, I held up my hand. The whispering had stopped. Everything had stopped. No wind, no sound. Even the stars seemed muted. Then we heard it. Wet clicking. Not like the whisper. Closer. Throatier. Like something trying to breathe through. Clogged lungs. It echoed from behind the ridge. Then something laughed. Not a human laugh. Not an animal. It was low and bubbling, like air being forced through a corpse's throat. Claire screamed. We grabbed our packs and ran. We didn't stop until the sky lightened. Felix's foot was bleeding. Claire had a limp. Tom was mumbling something under his breath. I caught parts of it. In the walls, the sand isn't sand. They feed on voices. I shook him. Tom, snap out of it. He blinked. His lips were cracked and bleeding. We're close, I said. A day out. Just one more day. But I was lying. I wasn't sure where we were anymore. The compass spun in circles. Our GPS flickered and died. The landmarks looked wrong. The sun rose from the wrong place. We were lost at noon. We found the first sign of someone else at a boot that half buried in the sand. Old, cracked. Inside was a skeletal foot, picked clean, as if something had sucked the flesh off like juice from a fruit. Claire retched. Tom dropped to his knees. Felix picked up the boot. Inside was a piece of paper, scrawled and barely legible. Ink were the words, "Don't let them hear your name." That night, we didn't sleep. We didn't talk. We just sat with our backs to each other, staring into the dark. The stars blinked in and out like they were being swallowed by clouds that weren't there. Around 3 a.m., Tom stood up. "Don't say it," I whispered. "Tom, don't." But it was too late. He said his own name loud, defiant. "Tom," he spat. "That's who I am. You want me? Come get me." He turned toward the dunes and screamed it, and something answered, not with words, with movement. The sand rose, waved, shaped and no form, no eyes, just a surge of darkness slithering across the earth like a wound come to life. It moved faster than I could process. It reached him in seconds. There was no scream, just the sound of suction, like something pulling a cork from a bottle, then silence. His flashlight lay spinning in the sand, flickering its beam in slow, useless arcs. 3 of us now, and another line of stones. 18 that I don't remember falling asleep, that I only remember waking to the heat. The kind that presses down like a punishment, seeping into your bones and boiling your thoughts. The kind of heat that makes time meaningless. We buried what was left of Tom. Or rather, we covered his flashlight with a stone cairn. There was nothing else to bury. Claire said a few words, though I'm not sure what her voice was, flat, hollowed out. Felix stood apart, staring at the horizon. I could see his lips moving, but I couldn't hear him. That day we didn't talk. Not even when we saw the spires again. They weren't supposed to be there. The tongues that I swear we'd walked away from them. They should have been miles behind us, and yet, there they were, rising from the desert floor like stone tumors, jagged and slick, throwing long shadows that reached for us like fingers. Claire froze when she saw them. Her eyes darted back and forth, as if trying to blink them into non-existence. "No," she whispered. "No, no, no." She dropped her pack and fell to her knees. Felix just stared. "We're walking in circles," he said, not looking at me. I checked the compass again. It spun lazily, pointless. Something in the desert had broken our sense of direction. Of reality. The horizon itself seemed to ripple and breathe. Sometimes I thought I saw figures out there, tall, thin, wavering forms like shadows walking through heat. But they never got closer. They didn't have to. That afternoon, we found the well. It wasn't marked on any of our maps. Just a round stone ring in the middle of nowhere, rimmed with sun-bleached bones. Mostly animal, but some too big for jackrabbits or coyotes. Some shaped like human ribs. A few had holes drilled through them, neat, symmetrical, as if something had sipped from them. Claire stood at the edge and looked down. "Do you hear it?" she asked. I joined her. The well was deep, too deep that I dropped a stone, and no sound. Claire tilted her head. "They're down there," she said. I grabbed her arm. "We need to keep moving." But she didn't look at me. She just said, "They're learning our voices." We left the well behind. But its shadow followed us by dusk. The wind returned, and with it, the whispering, louder now and no longer subtle. It scraped across the sand like dry leaves across teeth. Harsher, eager. There was a rhythm to it now, a cadence, like breathlessness mixed with hunger. We camped again without tents. Just sleeping bags and knives. Felix rigged a flare, but we knew it wouldn't help. That night, Claire vanished. She'd been beside me when I closed my eyes. I swear it, that I hadn't heard a thing. I no whispered, no scream. Just nothing. I woke up to find her sleeping bag empty, flaps fluttering in the still air. Her boots were gone. Her pendant, a small turtle charm she'd worn since I'd met her, was buried halfway into the sand. As if someone had tried to swallow it. I fell to my knees. It wasn't just grief. It was the realization that it was learning. Whatever it was, the sand, the desert, the thing in the crack. It was smart. Not human. Not even animal. But aware.it understood, ritual.it understood. Fear.it understood that by removing us one by one, by leaving just enough behind, it could teach us despair. I didn't touch Claire's pendant. I couldn't. Felix came over, silent, and stood beside me. We need to finish it, he said. What? He pointed to the tongues. It started there. We go back. We finish it. Or it finishes us. I wanted to scream. To argue. But there was nothing else to do. We weren't going to make it to the road. The horizon had become a maze of shifting lies. We could walk forever and never leave. The desert had claimed us, so we walked toward the mouth. We reached the rock formation by nightfall. The crack yawned open like a slit in the earth. It looked wider now, like it had grown. The air around it was thick, humming with the sound just below the threshold of hearing. Like wet breathing. The stones were lined up. In rows now. 36 of them. I didn't count them at first. Not until later. We built a fire. Felix set down the last flare and lit it. The light sputtered, casting jagged shadows across the rock walls. I sat down, facing the mouth, my back to the fire. That's when I noticed something carved into the stone. Not natural erosion, etchings, lines, symbols, circles of teeth, rows of spindled legs, shapes that made my stomach twist. The markings moved if I stared too long. I looked away. Felix stood beside me. You think it's been doing this for centuries? He asked. I nodded. Longer. He crouched, pulled something from his pocket. A notebook. Tom's. It had been in his pack when he vanished. Felix must have grabbed it without realizing. He handed it to me. Inside were drawings, dozens of them, spirals, teeth, the crack, the stones, and faces. Warped, eyeless faces with open mouths and long tongues. Below one sketch, a note. They are not gods, they are echoes. Another page. Don't let them speak your name. Don't think it. Names are how they enter. I closed the book. The wind kicked up. I stood and turned to Felix. They feed on sound. On memory, on identity. He looked at me. Then maybe we give them what they want. Before I could stop him, he stepped toward the crack. No! He turned back. It's the only way. You run. You tell someone. If anyone ever finds this place. He stopped. The whisper came again. Only it wasn't a whisper anymore. It was a chorus. My name. Over and over. Not just from the wind. From the crack. It was speaking from inside the rock. And it wasn't just saying my name. It was calling it. Retching it. Like a thing choking on sound. I clamped my hands over my ears. Felix didn't move. He walked into the mouth. Just walked. The stone swallowed him whole. I screamed. I screamed until my throat tore. And then I ran. I didn't stop running until the sky turned gray and the rocks were gone. Until I saw a light. A road. A truck. They found me staggering near a gas station 30 miles from Yuma. Dehydrated. Burnt. Wild-eyed. I don't remember what I said. I woke up in a hospital 3 days later and no one believed me. They searched. Found no sign of the others. The tongues didn't exist on any satellite image. The site was gone. But I remembered. I remember every whisper. Every name. Every stone. And sometimes, late at night, when the wind rattles the windows and the heater hums, I hear it again. A whisper. Dry. Clicking. Dragging my name. Through sand-covered teeth. And I know the desert hasn't finished with me yet. Because when I count the stones in my dreams, there are still only 36. And I was number 37. They let me go after 10 days. The hospital said I was lucky. Severe sunstroke. Mild renal failure. Early signs of exposure psychosis. Common in the desert, they told me. Not uncommon. People hallucinate. They panic. The heat makes the mind bend. Except hallucinations don't leave scars. I had 3 across my back. Thin, perfectly parallel lines. Like claws or teeth. The doctor couldn't explain them. Said I probably scratched myself during the delirium. But I remembered what really happened. I remembered the wind speaking my name in the voice of Claire. I remembered Felix walking willingly into the mouth. Not because he was brave, but because the whispers had convinced him it was what he wanted. And I remembered the line of stones. Always that. When I was discharged, they gave me a bag with my belongings. Inside was a waterlogged journal, Tom's that I must have clung to it the whole time that I didn't remember that. But I remembered the words inside. They are not gods. They are echoes that I moved back east. Took a job at a university. Something safe. Indoor labs.no fieldwork.my skin still itched at night. Even when the room was cool that I kept all the windows sealed that I slept with the lights on. Sometimes, I slept in the bathtub, surrounded by salt that I tried therapy that IT helped a little. They said the trauma had splintered my memory. That I might be projecting guilt. That perhaps there had been a rockfall or a sandstorm and the rest of the crew died. Maybe I was repressing it. Maybe I was lucky and no one mentioned whispers that I kept my mouth shut. Until the photos arrived at IT was a Thursday, I'd stayed late on campus to finish grading papers. When I got back to my apartment, the envelope was wedged into the screen door, no return address, no postage. Just my name written in cramped, uppercase letters. Inside were 6 photos. All black and white. All blurry. The first was of me, standing at the base of the tongues, facing away from the camera. I was alone. My posture stiff. Arms down. As if listening. The second was of the crack in the stone. The mouth. Except this time, it wasn't empty. A shape was emerging. Something slick, roped, glinting like wet leather in moonlight. No eyes, no mouth. Just skin. The third showed Claire, asleep in her tent. The fourth was of Tom, mid-scream, his face half-turned to the lens, eyes wide. The fifth was Felix, standing at the crack's edge, arms outstretched, and the sixth was blank at first glance. But if you tilted it just right, let the light hit at a specific angle, you could see something faint in the lower left corner, a spiral, made of teeth that I burned them. All 6, even so, I couldn't shake the feeling that someone or something had taken the photos. Not a person, a witness, a thing that watches from beneath the sand, that sees through cracks, that hears through wind. I didn't sleep that night. Over the following weeks, the dreams returned. They started slowly, just heat and dust, the sound of boots crunching on gravel. But then the whispering returned. I in my own voice. It was saying things I'd never said. Pleading, crying, begging to be let in, and always the counting. 36, and then my name, Jason. 37. I started checking the corners of my apartment. Found piles of sand behind the fridge, inside the closet. Once, even in my car's glove compartment, and no one else believed me. So I stopped trying. Instead, I began researching. Desert myths, indigenous lore. Pre-colonial structures. Anything I could find that hinted at the tongues. I learned that in the oldest Yavapai oral traditions, there were stories about a place where the wind dies, a valley swallowed by time, cursed by names, a place the dead went to be forgotten. The stories warned. Never speak your name too loudly in the desert. Never leave a line of stones behind you. Never sleep near cracked stone that drinks moonlight. One tale told of a tribe that vanished overnight. Left only their footprints and a single word scrawled in ash. Remember me. I found variations of the spiral too. Across cultures. Across centuries. In petroglyphs. In burial sites. In abandoned missions swallowed by sand. Always a spiral of teeth. Always near the edge of known land. I stopped attending faculty meetings. My skin grew thinner. The dark under my eyes deepened. I shaved my head and burned my clothing after finding a fine dust inside every fold. I kept thinking about the last words in Tom's journal. Don't let them speak your name. And I realized something. They didn't take us because they knew us. They took us because we knew ourselves. Our names were doors, and we kept leaving them open. I booked a flight west. Rented a Jeep, packed water, flares, a wind-up radio, and 6 days' worth of supplies. No electronics, no GPS, just maps. I spent hours studying wind patterns, erosion charts, and tribal maps. I pieced together what I could. I had to go back. Not to find the others. I knew they were gone. But because I hadn't been taken. I was unfinished. And they knew it. I drove for 2 days, slept in the car. Avoided eye contact at gas stations. Bought bags of salt and drew protective circles around myself each night. On the 3rd day, I saw them again. The tongues, exactly as I remembered, slick, silent, watching, The wind had died completely. I parked 100 yards out and no need to get closer. I could feel it already. The mouth, wider now. Waiting. I stood for hours before stepping forward. Not because I was afraid, because I needed to be sure I wasn't bringing something with me. That my name was buried deep enough to not be heard. That I walked toward the cracked and no whisper and no movement. Just the breath of ancient silence. Inside, it was cool. The stone walls slick, the markings pulsed faintly, like bioluminescence in deep water. That I followed the tunnel downward. The floor sloped gradually and my boots left no prints. That I lost track of time. Then I saw the chamber, circular, huge, lit by an impossible light that had no source. The walls were covered in the spiral, thousands of them. Layered, carved, painted, and in the center, a pool of sand. Still. Breathing. It inhaled when I stepped forward. A sound like dry lungs exhaling. And then, it spoke. Not with words, with names. My name and every voice I'd ever known. My mother. My childhood teacher. Claire, Felix, Tom. Even my OWNIT wrapped my identity around me like a shroud. And then it asked, "Are you ready to forget?" I didn't answer. Instead, I opened Tom's journal and tore out the last page. Then I lit it on fire. The wind shrieked, the spiral walls twisted, and the sand screamed. But I kept burning page by page. Name by name, until only silence remained. The fire shouldn't have burned. There was no oxygen down there and no breeze. Nothing to feed the flame, and yet the pages curled, blackened, and vanished like leaves in a forest fire. One after another. Tom's journal disappeared. Each name, each drawing, each memory. Swallowed by light, the chamber writhed. The spirals began to rotate. Not on the walls, but in them. The stone twisted, groaned, cracked, and from the center of the room, the sand shuddered, the breathing stopped. The silence that followed was not peaceful. It was expectant. I felt it in my bones. I had done something irreversible. A voice, neither loud nor quiet, neither inside my head nor outside it, began to speak. It wasn't a whisper. It was a memory. And it was mine. I heard my own voice telling stories I hadn't told in years. I saw flashes. My father lifting me onto his shoulders, a dog I'd lost as a child, the scent of the pine cabin where I spent every summer until I was 15. My first kiss. My first mistake. The name I wrote in a tree stump when I thought no one was watching. It knew all of it. But not because it had taken it from me, because I had brought it here, because I had fed it. Names are more than sound. Their shape, they're the framework of who we believe we are. And this place, this ancient place buried in a desert that pretended to forget, collected them, curated them, lived off them. I sank to my knees, because I finally understood. This wasn't a creature. Not in the traditional sense. It wasn't some desert monster or haunted god. It was a process. A system. Like gravity. Like erosion. Something deeper than folklore. The desert itself was part of it. Chosen or corrupted, I couldn't say. The wind, the sand, the heat, it all served one thing: to wear down. The idea of you until you were ready to be remembered differently. Until your name wasn't yours anymore. Until it belonged to them. But I had burned mine, and with each page that turned to ash, I felt it. My grip on my name loosening. Jason. A collection of letters. A sound in a mother's mouth. A scrawl on a driver's license. But it didn't mean anything here. And so, I gave it up. I took off my shirt, scraped my ID into the sand, spat my name into the fire and watched it burn too. The spiral walls stopped, moving. And from the pool of sand in the center of the chamber, something rose. It wasn't horrifying. It wasn't beautiful. It was nothing. A shape made of absence. A silhouette of suggestion, like looking into a hole and imagining what might be on the other side. It stepped forward. Where it moved, the spirals dulled. Where it paused, the air grew stiller than still. It reached out, not with hands, but with intention. And I realized what it wanted. It didn't want my death. It wanted my story. It wanted me to let go of everything I thought I was and become a part of it, to fill one of the silent spirals on the wall. To be another echo in the desert, another voice in the wind. But I wasn't ready. Not yet. I stood. The fire had gone out. My throat was my hands were blistered. But something in me was mine again. A memory. The first time I'd ever seen the stars through a telescope, I was 9. I didn't know the names of the constellations yet. I only knew they were beautiful. I hadn't told anyone that night. I had kept it to myself. A secret joy. And because I had never spoken it, they couldn't have it. That was the key. I backed away from the figure. It didn't follow. I kept my mind blank. Let only wordless feeling guide me. No names, no labels, no internal narration. Just motion. I turned and walked. The tunnel shivered as I passed. I felt the pressure. Like 1,000 eyes watching without sight, at 1,000,000 ears pressed to the stone that I emerged into. The desert just before dawn. The sun was a thin line on the horizon. The tongues behind me were already crumbling, shedding pieces like dead skin. The mouth began to close. I heard it. The final breath, a long, low exhale that stirred the sand around my feet and carried no voice. No names, no whispered. I collapsed. And when I woke, I was in a ranger's truck. He said he found me wandering near the highway, muttering about spirals. That was 3 months ago. I don't live in the desert anymore. I moved to the Pacific Northwest. Rain, trees. The wind speaks only in leaves here, not sand. But I still don't use my name. Not aloud. Not in thought. I don't let others say it more than once. I change jobs frequently. I keep my photo off the internet. I burn my mail. I wear plain clothes. Because I know the truth. The desert remembers. Not in the way a story is remembered, but in the way a wound remembers a knife. It will open again. And when it does, it will whisper a name, mine. Unless I'm careful. Unless I stay quiet. Unless I forget it first.